Lorraine says, do you have evidence of a special ERV sequence in humans? Well, I discuss in my book on ERVs and also in my videos that we can begin to determine what is a created ERV sequence or unit, okay, and what is not. And to do so, we need to look at that which is fixed. Fixed just means in genetics, stuck in place. So if everybody has this ERV sequence or unit, because there's also what's called solo LTRs, okay? These are just functional stretches of DNA. They have important functional roles. They serve as binding sites for transcription. They can act as promoters. And so it's the evolutionary community that argues these solo LTRs are basically just degenerated ERVs. They were once ERVs, but now they've lost your key ERV components like your GAG, your POL, your ENV components or genes. And so that's just an evolutionary assumption. That's just an evolutionary presupposition. They have no evidence for that. What we see is a functional stretch of DNA, these thousands of solo LTRs. LTR stands for long terminal repeat, that are shared across the biological world. Okay, so we share thousands of those with the great apes, specifically the chimpanzee. We have no reason to believe that those solo LTRs were once full ERVs. Okay, your full ERV comprises what? LTR on either side, GAG, POL, and ENV components or genes, okay? Your ENV is the envelope protein. It stands for envelope protein of the ERV. Now, this ERV shares sequence similarity to exogenous retroviruses. An exogenous retrovirus is built the same. LTR, GAG, POL, ENV. Okay, so the evolutionary community argues that the ERV must have come from a retrovirus, an exogenous retrovirus. Exogenous occurring from outside, horizontal transmission. The HIV virus is a well-known or famous exogenous retrovirus. And then you've also got an ERV, an endogenous retrovirus, meaning it occurs from within. Okay, so the question is, are these really the ancient remnants of past viral infections, or are they created units of DNA function? Because if they are created units of DNA function, then we have an elegant explanation or answer to the question of why do we share these with other creatures in the biological world, like the chimpanzee, for example, our so-called closest cousin in the biological world in the evolutionary family tree. Well, the answer is simple. The same reason why all modes of transportation have engines in common. It's good design. They're there for a functional reason. They have a very significant purpose. Okay. And so the reason why ERVs share sequence similarity with exogenous retroviruses is because they have to in order to carry out a number of their functional and operational roles. A couple of those operational roles are involved in the innate immune system and cell stress response. They fight off harmful viruses. They act as antiviral protectors in the genome. They are these front-loaded antiviral programs, amazingly designed and sophisticated DNA units. And then they are also involved in what's called viral mimicry. And they do this by fighting off or destroying tumor cells. And they have to look like the exogenous retrovirus that they are mimicking in order to carry out those roles. Okay. Now, the so-called ERVs that don't necessarily resemble your retroviruses, the ones that you have just a solo LTR, okay, those are only assumed by the evolutionary community to be or to have once been an ERV. But no, what we see is they have a function. They're tightly integrated into biological systems and genetic systems of biological organisms, and they have important functional roles. And so the best explanation for those is that they are simply functional stretches of DNA. And so if they're fixed, if they're functional, if they're not disease causing for the most part, they are created. We have good evidence for that. Now with Lorraine's, to answer her question in its entirety, ones that are not fixed, ones that are disease causing, and ones that are not functional, at least in terms of having an essential function, like in placental development and embryological development, those we would argue are from true infection, passed on vertically, hit in the right spot, and they've become endogenized. Okay. And so let's see here. Looking at the chat. Lorraine says, but function is not a refutation of common ancestry. If that function has no explanation in terms of how it could have originated due to selection, due to evolutionary pressures, so-called beneficial mutation accumulation, then yes, it is a refutation of common ancestry. These fixed ERVs are tightly integrated into these biological systems, these genetic systems, and they have functions that the evolutionary community simply don't have evidence for how they could have originated naturally. That's why my challenge to the evolutionary community has been and continues to be, show me an example of a non-functional endogenous retrovirus going from non-functional to something as functional as these ERVs that we see are involved in embryological development. They're involved in the placenta. And so you can find a number of papers in the conventional literature. One that specifically comes to mind literally admits, they confess that if we did not have these ERVs, then mammals as we know would not exist. I like to exist. Lorraine likes to exist. We like to exist. And we actually would not exist without these ERVs and ERV units. And so that tells us that they are essential. And so the evolutionary community, they have some nice philosophy. Okay, they have a great story. Evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine that they're related to whales and pine trees, but without any empirical evidence, then it's just pseudoscience. It's just a story. It's their philosophy. And so we need to see how these functional roles can come about. Okay, because if viral DNA randomly inserts itself into a cell, into a host cell, it's more likely to disrupt genetic functionality than make it better. It would be like if a painter who was blindfolded, if he were to apply random brush strokes to a painting he was working on, he's more likely to ruin the painting, to make it worse than make it better. Okay, and that's why it makes more sense that these ERVs with these essential functional roles were front-loaded in the beginning by God, by a designer. And so we share these ERV units with the biological world because it's good design. Humans build in homologous patterns. Humans build in nested hierarchical patterns. And so why shouldn't God? The Bible says that we are created in the image of God. And so we should be able to get a sense for how God created based on the way we create, based on the way we design things. And it just so turns out that humans build in homologous patterns. Humans build in nested hierarchical patterns. And so this just happened to be the case. And it turns out that God designed a biological world with similarities in anatomy, morphology, genetics, and physiology, and also built in hierarchical patterns. Every single creature has to be more similar to one creature and less similar to another. So, for example, humans, we're designed with RNA, with DNA, with proteins. So are other creatures in the biological world. Okay, we're all built with these basic building blocks and these information systems. Okay, highly complex information systems like DNA. And so of course we're gonna share more with, let's say, the chimpanzee. We look a lot more like the chimpanzee than we do with a banana plant or a dog. And so there's this natural nested hierarchy where, yeah, humans look a lot more like the great apes than they do, or we do, with a banana plant or a dog. So it's just a natural nested hierarchy. A sedan has more in common, looks a lot more like a hatchback than it does with a van. So the hatchback and the sedan are going to share more with each other than they will with a semi-tractor trailer or an airplane or a boat or an unpowered vehicle like a bicycle. Okay, there's a natural nested hierarchy that exists in both the design world and the biological world, showing that the biological world is indeed designed by God. But God is such a more sophisticated designer than we are. We're just in the infancy of recognizing design. And so God was able to create his creation, he was able to design the biological world with the ability to reproduce, to pass on their genes. This is incredible design. This is incredibly sophisticated, and it defies naturalistic explanations.